Good evening. Tonight, I want to begin with a moment that never appeared on any battlefield map. It did not involve missiles. It did not involve tanks. It did not involve borders. It happened inside the minds of people who believed they were in control. It was the moment when certainty began to crack, not publicly, not dramatically, quietly, privately, in offices, in briefing rooms, in phone calls that went unanswered, in reports that did not match expectations, in maps that stopped making sense. That moment, the moment when leaders realize that a war is no longer doing what they told it to do, is where this story begins. Because once certainty ends, everything changes. Before February 2022, the invasion of Ukraine existed as a conclusion, not a question, not a risk, a conclusion. Inside Russia's political and military system, the outcome was treated as settled. Ukraine would not resist seriously. Its leadership would fracture, its army would collapse, its population would accept new reality, the West would protest, then adapt, then move on. That confidence did not come from nowhere. It was built over years through filtered intelligence, through loyal advisors, through state-controlled media, through selective memory, through the steady removal of dissent. Gradually, uncertainty was engineered out of the system. And when uncertainty disappears, so does caution. The invasion was planned like a corporate expansion. Timelines, benchmarks, performance indicators, risk assessments, contingency scenarios. Each phase had objectives. Each objective had metrics. Each metric had expected outcomes: Kiev by this date, political collapse by that date, stabilization by the next. It was war as spreadsheet, war as project management, war as something that could be optimized. What those plans did not measure was human will. They did not measure attachment to place. They did not measure civic pride. They did not measure historical memory. They did not measure anger. They did not measure solidarity. They did not measure moral outrage. And those unmeasured variables would dominate everything. When the invasion began, the physical shock was immense. Missiles across cities, airfields burning, roads filling, phones lighting up, families waking each other, sirens tearing through sleep. It was terrifying, but it was also clarifying. People understood immediately. This was not temporary. This was not limited. This was not symbolic. This was existential, and clarity produces action. Ukrainians did not wait for instructions. They organized. They checked on neighbors. They opened basements. They formed queues for blood donation. They volunteered for territorial defense. They created supply chains online, they mapped shelters, they shared resources. Fear did not paralyze, it coordinated. In the first week of the war, one decision reshaped everything. Ukraine's leadership did not leave. They did not relocate. They did not vanish into secrecy. They appeared on streets, in offices, in simple videos, with minimal production, with no spectacle. They spoke directly, not with triumph, with honesty. We are here, we are working, we are staying. That message was not propaganda. It was evidence. It proved that abandonment was not underway. It told citizens that negotiation was not happening behind closed doors. It told allies that investment was justified. And it told Russia that psychological decapitation had failed. Wars often turn on small signals. This was one of them. Russia's campaign depended on synchronization, fuel deliveries, unit coordination, air support. Communications, reinforcements, repairs, everything had to align. It didn't. Vehicles stalled, supplies ran short, communications failed, maps were outdated, intelligence was incomplete, officers hesitated, orders conflicted, small problems multiplied. Each delay exposed new vulnerabilities, and Ukraine exploited them with drones, with ambushes, with local intelligence, with mobility, with creativity. Precision collapsed into improvisation, and improvisation favored the defender. Ukraine learned in public. Mistakes were visible, losses acknowledged, adjustments rapid. Civilian engineers improved drones, programmers built battlefield tools, medics redesigned evacuation systems, teachers created emergency education, volunteers solved logistics, commanders encouraged initiative, feedback traveled quickly, solutions spread. This created a learning ecosystem, not perfect, not orderly, but fast. Russia's learning system was slower. Failure was dangerous. Bad news was softened. Responsibility avoided. Innovation stalled. The gap widened. In the first days, Western leaders hesitated. Escalation risks were real. Nuclear shadows loomed. Historical fears lingered. But Ukraine's resistance changed the equation. It demonstrated seriousness, commitment, capability, aid increased, weapons arrived, training expanded, intelligence sharing deepened, financial support stabilized institutions. Ukraine was no longer alone. It was integrated. That integration altered the war's structure. It became a contest between systems, not just armies. By late 2022, war was no longer an event. It was an environment. Sirens were routine, blackouts were scheduled, shelters were familiar, work adapted, schools relocated, hospitals improvised, life reorganized itself, not because people accepted war, because they refused to let it erase life. Adaptation became resistance. Adaptation carried cost, exhaustion, anxiety, delayed grief, unspoken trauma, interrupted futures. People learned to function while hurting, to work while mourning, to plan while fearing. Collective strength was built on private pain. That pain did not disappear. It accumulated. As months passed, Russia's objectives blurred, deadlines vanished, rhetoric shifted, commanders rotated, no clear victory path emerged. Withdrawal was unacceptable, escalation was risky, so the war continued. Not by design, by inertia, by institutional paralysis, by inability to admit error. This is how wars become long. What surprised many observers was not Ukraine's military performance. It was its institutional survival. Courts functioned, local governments operated, universities graduated students, media investigated. Anti-corruption systems persisted. Cultural life continued. These were acts of defense. They preserved normality. They maintained legitimacy. They prevented social disintegration. A state that functions is harder to defeat. Around the world, governments watched. Military planners took notes. Energy strategists revised models. Alliance structures shifted. Neutrality was reconsidered. Defense budgets rose. Ukraine became case study. Russia became cautionary tale. The war reshaped assumptions. At the heart of this story is one mistake: the belief that power could replace consent, that fear could replace loyalty, that planning could replace legitimacy, that control could replace trust. This belief shaped the invasion. And it failed. Societies are not machines. They cannot be programmed. They cannot be optimized. They cannot be subdued indefinitely. They respond. They adapt. They resist. Part one of this story is about the end of certainty, about what happens when predictions unravel, when authority loses its script, when history refuses to cooperate. This war was supposed to be decisive. It became transformative. It was meant to demonstrate dominance. It revealed resilience. It was meant to simplify politics. It complicated everything. And once certainty ends, leaders face a choice: learn, adapt, rebuild legitimacy, or deny, harden, and drift. In part two, we will explore how that choice reshaped leadership itself, how prolonged failure and resistance transformed power, accountability, and political sur. In part one, we examined the collapse of certainty, how a war launched with confidence unraveled into complexity, how control became improvisation, how prediction met resistance. Tonight, we turn to what happens after that collapse. Because once certainty ends, leaders do not step aside. They continue ruling, they continue deciding, they continue projecting authority, but they do so without guarantees, without clear timelines, without predictable outcomes. Ruling without certainty is not simply difficult, it is destabilizing. And over the course of this war, both Russia and Ukraine have been forced to govern inside that destabilization. The difference is how authoritarian systems depend heavily on predictability. The leader projects strength. The system projects inevitability. The public is told that events are under control, that crises are temporary, that victory is assured. When reality contradicts that projection, the system must choose adjust the narrative or adjust reality. In Russia, the narrative adjusted. Objectives were reframed, timelines extended, withdrawals described as strategic redeployments, losses minimized, sanctions described as opportunities. Victory postponed but never abandoned. This preserved the appearance of direction, but appearances cannot permanently substitute for outcomes. Over time, narrative inflation erodes trust. People begin to read between lines, to interpret tone rather than content, to measure credibility by silence. That is not stability, it is managed doubt. As setbacks accumulated, Moscow tightened control. Media restrictions intensified, independent outlets closed, speech laws broadened, criticism criminalized, protests suppressed, dissent exiled. These actions reduced visible instability, but they did not eliminate uncertainty. They pushed it inward. In authoritarian systems, containment often replaces correction. Problems are hidden rather than solved. Statistics are adjusted. Blame is redirected. Responsibility is diffused. But wars resist containment. They produce tangible evidence. Funerals, empty seats. Economic strain. Stories shared privately. Containment works best when consequences are abstract. War makes them concrete. Ukraine faced the opposite challenge. Not how to contain perception, how to maintain functionality. Government did not pause. It accelerated. Emergency legislation passed. Reconstruction frameworks designed. Anti-corruption investigations continued. Municipal services adapted. Energy grids rebuilt repeatedly. Foreign diplomacy intensified. The war did not suspend politics. It compressed it. Every decision carried amplified consequence. Every failure was public. Every success fragile. Ruling under fire required visibility, and visibility created accountability. This is risky. Transparency exposes weakness, but it also builds legitimacy. Citizens can forgive hardship. They rarely forgive deception. Authority during war rests heavily on fairness. Who bears the cost? Who is exempt? Who decides? In Ukraine, conscription was broad, sacrifice visible, leaders visited front lines, relatives served, privileges reduced. There were debates, complaints, but burden felt shared. In Russia, mobilization revealed disparities. Peripheral regions supplied disproportionate manpower. Urban elites found exemptions. Economic strain fell unevenly. When sacrifice appears unequal, authority weakens. War magnifies inequality. It makes it impossible to ignore. War economies are volatile. Budgets expand. Inflation rises. Trade patterns shift. Investment shrinks. In Russia, sanctions forced improvisation. Imports rerouted. Industries substituted components. Parallel markets expanded, defense spending ballooned, short-term stability was maintained, long-term planning suffered. In Ukraine, survival depended on external support, loans, grants, military aid, budget assistance. Governance required diplomacy. Every policy decision was tied to international confidence. Ruling without certainty meant negotiating constantly, externally and internally. Uncertainty often strengthens security institutions. In Russia, internal security agencies gained prominence, surveillance expanded, legal boundaries blurred, fear became tool, stability prioritized over flexibility. This created short-term cohesion, but long-term rigidity. Systems that rely on fear must continuously reinforce it, and reinforcement consumes energy. In Ukraine, security expanded too, but with parliamentary oversight, public debate, legal frameworks. Emergency powers were invoked, but also scrutinized. This distinction matters. Unchecked security centralizes power. Supervised security preserves balance. No leader rules alone. Elites matter. In Moscow, elite unity remained outwardly intact, but sanctions restricted travel. Assets frozen abroad. Opportunities narrowed, economic incentives shifted, the old contract, loyalty in exchange for prosperity, strained. Public dissent remained rare. Private discomfort likely grew. When elites lose confidence in outcomes, they hedge. Hedging weakens systems quietly. In Kiev, elite cohesion was reinforced by existential threat. Political rivalries subsided. Opposition integrated into governance. Debate continued. But fragmentation was minimized. Shared danger produces alignment until danger fades. In prolonged war, communication is policy. Ukraine's leadership communicated constantly, updates, appeals, acknowledgements of loss, requests for aid, messages of resilience. Consistency built trust. Russia's communication grew more formal, ceremonial, scripted, distance widened, authority retreated into symbolism. Symbolism sustains loyalty, but not indefinitely. Ruling without certainty carries personal cost. Leaders operate under incomplete information. Consequences are delayed, outcomes unpredictable. Every decision may cost lives. Sleep shortens, circles shrink, paranoia increases, caution deepens. In both capitals, leadership operated under relentless pressure, but pressure reveals character. Some systems open under strain, others close. Legitimacy is not static. It must be renewed. Ukraine renewed it through elections postponed constitutionally, through parliamentary debate, through civil society participation, through investigative journalism, even during war. Russia renewed it through performance, staged referendums, patriotic rallies, symbolic gestures. One model depends on participation, the other on projection. Projection can sustain authority. Participation embeds it.